Shabbat Shalom, everyone. The God of Leviticus loves recipes, and the more precise and complicated, the better. If we look at the intricate descriptions of the sacrifices and the rituals that make up this book, from the unblemished heifers to the placement of the oil on the bodies of the priests, we see that when it comes to ritual, God really sweats the details and hopes that we do the same. God's love of order stretches all the way back to the very beginning when the earth was tohu vavohu, unformed and chaotic. God sees this and responds by imposing order where there's chaos, separating light from dark and sky from water and water from land and every kind of animal and plant from every other kind. And then God looks at this orderly universe and pronounces it good. Well, almost immediately, human beings upend God's plan. Their free will leads them to breach the boundaries that God made for them. And that begins a long struggle between God and humankind, in which we vacillate between chaos and order and sin and redemption. And by the time we reach the book of Leviticus, there's a whole system of ritual that is created to help us move from moments of chaos back to order. This week, for example, we read about the asham, which is translated as the guilt or the reparation offering. This is an offering we're supposed to bring when we have transgressed, to bring us back into right relationship with God and society. Well, how are we supposed to do that? God gives us a recipe. The reparation offering shall be slaughtered, and the blood shall be dashed on all sides of the author, Leviticus tells us. All its fat shall be offered, the broad tail, the fat that covers the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which shall be removed with the kidneys. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire to the Lord. When we lose our way, God gives the Israelites a detailed roadmap for repentance, right down to what to do with the fat that covers the kidneys on the animal that they're sacrificing. The minutiae of this ritual, while it may be perplexing, is essential to the purpose of it. By requiring this painstaking attention to detail, the guilt offering brings people back from the inattention or the lack of resolve that may have caused them to stray. It reasserts the importance of imposing scrupulous order on their behavior. Alan Marinas, in his book Everyday Holiness, points out how order and precision continue to be central to Jewish observance. He says, the rabbis who have drawn the commandments from the Torah have enumerated the ways to serve God and have given us the Seder, the order, according to which each should be performed. For example, we're commanded to eat matzah and drink 4 cups of wine on Passover. At one point, it's matzah, and a second later, beyond the 18 minutes that it takes to leaven, the matzah would be forbidden for Passover. There are measurements for how much matzah is required to fulfill the commandment and how much wine constitutes a cup. And of course, all these acts are organized in a specific sequence, which takes place at the Passover Seder, which shares that word for order. Well, nothing magic happens between minute 18 and minute 19 to render the matzah unkosher. But by setting the rules around the baking of the matzah and being attentive to them, we heighten our attunement to the particular moment we're celebrating. And we don't each pick the week that works best for us for Passover. If we could, probably most of us who are isolated from our friends and family would not pick this coming week. But instead, we abide by the order of the Jewish calendar, which connects us more deeply to the wider community. We find ourselves right now in a moment of chaos when all of the rules and structures that govern our lives, school and work and family gatherings have suddenly been swept away. we look at our lives and we see tohu vavohu, chaos and disorder. And like God surveying the primordial mess that preceded creation, we know it is not good. This is a time when ritual comes in handy. Not only the religious rituals of Shabbat or Passover, although we recommend those, but also the very basic rituals that help give order to our lives. If you look online, you'll find lots of advice about how to cope with our new reality. And it's all about ritual. Set your alarm for the same time every day. Change out of your nighttime pajamas into your daytime pajamas for work. Create color-coded schedules for your kids' otherwise free-form days of homeschooling. And have you noticed? Everyone is baking, just like Rabbi Buchdahl said. What is that about? I'll tell you my theory. There are two types of people in the world, cooks and bakers. Cooks are good at opening the fridge and improvising with whatever they find there. And bakers are really good at following very specific directions. And suddenly, everyone's a baker. Why? Because just as God and the priests of Leviticus knew, the answer to chaos is order. When we tackle a precise multi-step recipe, whether it involves the protuberance of the liver, as in the Asham offering, or the perfect sourdough loaf, we're forced to focus on one thing we can control. In the New York Times this week, Alexandra Marvar writes about the surge in baking during this new pandemic. She quotes Dr. Craig Spencer, an emergency room doctor at New York Presbyterian Hospital, who takes time to bake when he's home. He says, "The thing I think about when I'm making my bread is only my bread. I'm not thinking about coronavirus or anything else." In other words, baking encourages a kind of mindfulness that many of us are hungry for right now. Likewise, Jeremy Konidnik, a pandemic preparedness expert, explains, in disaster relief, famine, war, epidemics, the crisis goes on and on. There's no point when you're finished. But, he says, baking lets you take a project from beginning to end. So maybe that's why the whole world is making bread. We know deep in our bones, just as God taught us in Leviticus, that when we are faced with chaos, anxiety, and fear, following a recipe can help us both nourish our bodies and soothe our souls. That's the wisdom of ritual. If you don't like baking, break out a puzzle or a detailed coloring book or a piece of complicated knitting. Pick something painstaking and specific. And please note, this is not a command for perfection. When you prepare for your Seder, do not feel compelled to make everything perfect. If all you do is sing Dayenu, Dayenu. But you may find that picking one hands-on task that will demand all of your attention and doing it, even if you don't do it perfectly, is good for the soul. This week, I'm imagining God as a baker, separating out the light from dark like we separate the yolk of an egg from its white. I imagine God rolling out the fine, delicate petals of those daffodils like you roll out marzipan, and piping the buds onto the trees like you would decorate a birthday cake for someone you love. And so when we break out our flour and our sugar and get our hands messy in the act of creation, we're connecting to that creative force, the God of creation and of Leviticus. A God who knows us well enough to know that when the world has been upended, sometimes we need a recipe to help us find our way back to balance and connection with the source of everything, who keeps our world turning even now.